The moment Jonathan Roumie heard Whoopi Goldberg accuse him on live television of disliking Jesus, everything shifted. "You're earning money through Jesus while teaching people to reject the message he actually shared," she said firmly, pointing at the well-known actor who had portrayed Christ for millions through The Chosen. The claim was severe, that a man admired for depicting the Savior supposedly opposed the very principles Jesus taught. His reply would leave her without a response. The studio became completely quiet as viewers everywhere waited to see how someone known for embodying Christ's compassion would address such a serious charge. In that tense moment, Jonathan Roumie prepared to speak words that would have lasting impact. 2 hours earlier, Jonathan had knelt in prayer in his Manhattan hotel room, asking for guidance for the interview ahead. He knew the conversation would be challenging, but he sensed it was meant for something more significant than publicity. The invitation had originally been presented as a chance to promote the new season of The Chosen, although Jonathan believed there was a deeper purpose behind it. Whoopi had been watching The Chosen with increasing concern, not because of its production value, but because she believed the show presented a restrictive interpretation of Christianity. To her, the series highlighted an exclusive viewpoint that conflicted with her own spiritual beliefs, which combine multiple traditions and do not accept Jesus as the sole path to God. This interview offered her an opportunity to question what she considered religious exclusivity presented as entertainment. When Jonathan arrived at ABC Studios that morning, he carried his grandmother's wooden cross in his jacket pocket. A security guard recognized him instantly and said, "My family loves The Chosen, Mr. Roumie. You helped us see Jesus differently." Jonathan signed autographs for staff members and prayed with a makeup artist whose mother was unwell, taking his place in the green room with a calm sense that whatever happened would serve a larger purpose. Everything was prepared for a discussion that would extend beyond the walls of the studio, as two differing worldviews prepared to meet head-on. Neither Jonathan nor Whoopi expected that the conversation would become a significant moment for many who would watch it. The interview began politely, with standard questions about the success of The Chosen and Jonathan's career as an actor. Whoopi introduced him warmly, acknowledging his talent while subtly signaling that the discussion would soon move in a more complex direction. "Jonathan Roumie has reached audiences around the world with his portrayal of Jesus Christ," she said, her tone suggesting that more direct questions were coming. The other hosts asked about his preparation for the role, the research behind it, and the global influence of the series. Jonathan responded thoughtfully, sharing stories from viewers who said the show helped them reconnect with their faith. He consistently redirected any personal praise, emphasizing the greater purpose of the project. "It means a lot to hear how the show has impacted people," Jonathan said with sincerity. "But I want to clarify, I'm simply an actor. It's the real Jesus who changes lives, not me." He explained the extensive study he had undertaken, working with scholars from different religious backgrounds, learning Aramaic, and spending many hours in prayer and reflection to portray Christ with accuracy. His humility was clear as he described the responsibility he felt toward both believers and non-believers who watched the series. "I never want to interfere with anyone's relationship with God," he added, a statement that would later prove unexpectedly significant. The audience reacted positively, though Whoopi's expression shifted slightly, her smile tightening as Jonathan spoke about the real Jesus. As the discussion continued, Whoopi's questions became more direct. "Your show presents a particular interpretation of Christianity," she said, her voice still calm but with a sharper tone. "Some critics say it promotes an exclusive belief that Jesus is the only way to God. Don't you think that could be harmful in a diverse society?" Jonathan paused, recognizing that this was not a casual question but a challenge to the core of his beliefs. He looked at Whoopi with kindness but without wavering. "I believe what Jesus taught, that he is the way, the truth, and the life," he replied gently. "I'm not here to impose that on anyone, but I can't deny what I hold to be true." The audience murmured, aware of the growing tension. Whoopi's expression changed further as his answer seemed to strike a deeper issue. Her long-standing belief in spiritual pluralism, her conviction that many paths lead to the same destination, directly clashed with Jonathan's calm but firm stance. "But that's the problem," she said, raising her voice slightly. "When you say Jesus is the only way, you're implying that billions of people with other faith traditions are wrong. How is that loving?" The question carried strong weight, and Jonathan felt the attention of the entire audience. He remembered the Buddhist monk he'd spoken with during his research, the Muslim scholar who helped him understand first-century culture, and the Jewish rabbi who had become a close friend. His faith had not limited his respect for them. It had increased it, rooted in sincere care for their spiritual well-being. "Whoopi, I have close friends from many different traditions," Jonathan said, his voice steady. My belief that Jesus is the way doesn't make me love them less. It makes me care for them more because I want them to experience the same hope, peace, and salvation that I've found. He spoke about these friendships, interfaith discussions, and his respect for people of every background. Truth isn't intolerance simply because it's exclusive, he continued. If I told you there was only one cure for a serious illness, would that make me hateful? Or would it show compassion by sharing something that could save your life? Several audience members nodded, understanding the comparison. Whoopi, however, was not convinced. If anything, his thoughtful answer seemed to increase her frustration. The co-hosts exchanged looks, realizing the conversation was moving into territory rarely addressed on daytime television. One tried to shift to a lighter topic about Jonathan's other acting work, but Whoopi continued. She had been building toward a specific point, and Jonathan's calm persistence had touched a sensitive area. Let me ask you something directly, she said, leaning forward. Do you believe that someone like me, who finds truth in multiple spiritual traditions, is going to hell? The question struck the room sharply. The audience reacted, and the cameras zoomed in on Jonathan. This was the moment designed to force him into either compromising his beliefs or appearing judgmental. Jonathan briefly closed his eyes, not out of uncertainty, but in a quiet request for clarity. When he looked back at Whoopi, his expression held sincere compassion. Whoopi, that's not a judgment I can make, he responded softly. But I care about you enough to share what I believe can bring life and hope. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live. I'm not condemning anyone, I'm offering hope. His tone held no superiority, only concern. If you were in a burning building, wouldn't you want someone to tell you where the exit is? The comparison was simple but clear, and the studio became very still. Even Whoopi was briefly taken aback by the gentleness with which he expressed a firm conviction. But the pause did not last. As she absorbed his answer, her frustration grew. This is exactly what I mean, she said sharply. You're using your platform as the actor who plays Jesus to tell people that their beliefs aren't enough. How is that different from extremists who have caused harm throughout history? The accusation felt weighty, connecting centuries of religious conflict to his personal stance. Some audience members agreed, while others appeared uncomfortable with the comparison. Jonathan thought of his colleagues from The Chosen as the discussion continued to intensify. The Jewish actors, the diverse production team, and the interfaith relationships he had developed all came to Jonathan's mind. How could he clearly explain that genuine Christianity opposed extremism? Whoopi, I understand why you're concerned, Jonathan said, keeping his voice steady despite the increasing tension. Religious extremism has caused deep harm, and that breaks my heart. But what Jesus taught was entirely different from hatred or violence. He called us to love our enemies, turn the other cheek, and serve others before ourselves. He mentioned the early Christians who were persecuted rather than being persecutors. He referred to Jesus weeping over Jerusalem and emphasized that the greatest commandments were to love God and others. Whenever Christians have acted against those teachings, he added, they weren't following Jesus, they were misrepresenting him. My faith teaches me to serve, not to dominate, he continued. Some audience members seemed to understand the distinction, but Whoopi remained unconvinced, her expression tightening as she prepared for her strongest critique. The other co-hosts tried to step in, realizing that the discussion was moving far outside typical daytime programming. Maybe we should, one began, but Whoopi interrupted firmly. She had been working toward this moment and wasn't going to let it pass. Let me tell you what I think, she said, her tone dropping into something more serious. I think you've built a career portraying Jesus while missing his real message. You talk about love, but what you're actually doing is creating division. You say you follow Christ, but you're doing exactly what he warned against, judging others and claiming exclusive truth. Her words were intentional and aimed at the core of Jonathan's beliefs. The audience fell silent, sensing the shift from discussion to personal criticism. The conversation was no longer just about religion. It had become a direct challenge to Jonathan's sincerity and character. Jonathan felt the intensity of her words, not as an attack on his reputation, but as a misunderstanding of the message he had dedicated years to studying and living. Whoopi, he replied quietly, I'm not judging anyone. Jesus said he didn't come to condemn the world, but to save it. When I share what I believe, it's not from superiority, it's from gratitude. He spoke about his own faults, his need for grace, and his conviction that he was not above anyone else. The ground is level at the foot of the cross, he said. I'm not looking down on anyone. I'm pointing toward hope. His sincerity seemed to heighten Whoopi's frustration. She had expected defensiveness or anger, something that would support her argument. Instead, his calm response made her appear more confrontational. The tension in the studio rose as she prepared her final point. Producers debated whether to end the segment, knowing the exchange was becoming historic. Social media was already reacting as viewers took sides, with hashtags about the moment trending globally. Jonathan sat quietly, hands together, calm despite the pressure. He thought of Jesus before Pilate, patient under accusation, and found strength in that example. He was prepared to respond with grace whatever came next. Whoopi leaned forward, intensity in her expression, and the entire studio seemed to freeze. "You want to know what I really think?" she said, her voice firm. "I think you're a fraud. You've made a career playing Jesus while going against everything he taught. You talk about love, but your message pushes people away. You say you follow Christ, but you're leading people away from his true message of acceptance and love." Her statement was direct, and the audience gasped. Jonathan remained composed, though those who knew him could see the faint tightness around his eyes, not from anger but from sadness. He was being accused of the very thing he worked hard to avoid, misrepresenting the faith he held deeply. The studio became completely quiet. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were filled with compassion rather than hurt. "Whoopi," he said softly, his voice carrying across the room, "I'm sorry you see it that way. But I want to ask you something I hope you'll truly consider." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "If Jesus himself were sitting here and said, 'I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me,' would you call him a fraud too? Would you say he was teaching hate?" The question revealed the deeper issue behind their disagreement, cutting to the real source of tension between them. This discussion wasn't centered on Jonathan's performance or his personal interpretation. It focused on Jesus himself and the clear statements he made. The question lingered in the air, less as a challenge and more as an invitation to reflect on something meaningful. Whoopi opened her mouth to respond, then paused as she processed the weight of Jonathan's question. The other co-hosts looked taken aback, realizing the conversation had shifted beyond entertainment and into deeper spiritual territory. Several audience members appeared emotional, some quietly wiping tears, others sitting in thoughtful silence. Jonathan continued, speaking in a calm yet firm tone. "Those aren't my words, Whoopi. They're his. Recorded in John 14 verse 6. I'm not adding to or changing what Jesus said. I'm simply choosing to believe it." His direct explanation had a clarity that needed no defense. He wasn't arguing for a personal version of Christianity, he was referring back to Jesus' own statements. Whoopi hesitated, understanding that Jonathan had reframed the entire discussion. Criticizing his viewpoint now risked appearing as criticism of Jesus' teachings themselves, something even many of her supporters would struggle with. But that's one verse," she said, searching for footing. "It's taken out of context. Jesus also taught love, acceptance, not judging." Jonathan nodded, acknowledging her point. "You're absolutely right," he replied. "Jesus did say all those things. He taught us to love everyone, which is why I share what I believe can help them. He said not to judge, which is why I'm not condemning anyone. I'm offering hope." All of his teachings work together. His love and his truth aren't opposed, they support each other. His ability to agree with her while still challenging her argument left her visibly unsettled. Producers signaled that it was time for a commercial break, but Whoopi motioned for them to wait, trying to regain control of the moment. "You're twisting everything," she argued, but her voice lacked the confidence she had earlier. Jesus' message was about acceptance, embracing everyone regardless of their beliefs. "You're making it seem narrow and exclusionary." Jonathan leaned in slightly, keeping steady eye contact. "Whoopi, Jesus welcomed everyone. Tax collectors, those society rejected, people with complicated pasts. But he didn't leave them the same. He told the woman caught in adultery, 'I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more.' That's love and truth together." His tone remained calm but assured. Accepting people doesn't mean agreeing with every belief or action. Sometimes caring for someone means sharing truths that are difficult. The audience was deeply engaged, many leaning forward as if afraid to miss anything. Online platforms were already filled with live reactions, and religious leaders across denominations were commenting. News outlets began preparing segments. What started as a simple interview had become a national conversation about faith. Jonathan sensed the seriousness of the moment. He felt the weight of speaking not only as an actor but as someone who had been given a significant platform. He silently asked for guidance, aware that his words might influence many viewers. Whoopi then shifted her approach, speaking more personally. Jonathan, I've studied religion my whole life. I found wisdom in Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. They all offer something valuable. Why can't we appreciate that diversity without insisting that one path is the only correct one? Her question revealed sincere curiosity, a genuine struggle to understand exclusive truth claims in spirituality. Jonathan's expression softened as he recognized the honest search behind her words. I respect your journey, Whoopi, he replied. And I agree that many traditions contain wisdom. But wisdom and salvation aren't the same. Jesus didn't just come to teach better living. He came to die for our sins and rise again, defeating death itself. His voice reflected deep respect as he spoke of Jesus' purpose. That's the difference, Jonathan continued, now speaking with clear conviction. Other teachers offered insights, philosophies, and guidance. Jesus offered redemption. He didn't just point to a path, he claimed to be the path. When he said, I am the resurrection and the life, he wasn't using symbolism. He was presenting a claim that either makes Jesus the most significant figure in history, or, he paused, allowing the audience to consider the implication. C.S. Lewis described it clearly. Jesus was either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. He cannot be viewed merely as a good teacher while also making statements such as, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The reasoning was straightforward, and even those who disagreed with Jonathan could not ignore the strength of his argument. Whoopi shifted in her seat, feeling the dialogue move further out of her control. She had hoped to challenge what she believed was Jonathan's narrow thinking, but instead found herself facing the direct claims of Jesus. But what about all the good people who believe differently? She asked, her tone carrying frustration. Are you saying they're all mistaken? That Mother Teresa's work doesn't matter because she was Catholic? That Gandhi's compassion means nothing because he wasn't Christian? Her questions appealed to emotion, aiming to make Jonathan's stance appear rigid or dismissive of genuine goodness around the world. It was her final effort to present his faith as inconsistent with basic human kindness. Jonathan's response took everyone by surprise, including Whoopi. Mother Teresa and Gandhi were remarkable individuals who reflected aspects of God's character in meaningful ways, he said, his tone sincere. I would never diminish their contributions. But I believe they would both tell you that their good works could not save them. Only Jesus could. He referenced Mother Teresa's own written reflections about struggling with doubt and recognizing her dependence on Christ, understanding that her charity was an expression of grace rather than a means to earn it. He added, Gandhi himself once said, I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. He saw something unique in Jesus that stood apart from everything else. Jonathan's ability to appreciate these influential figures while still holding firm to his beliefs showed a level of nuance Whoopi had not anticipated. By now, the conversation had stretched nearly 20 minutes, far longer than the typical segment on The View. Producers received urgent messages from network executives, but with ratings surging, they knew this moment was capturing national attention. Sensing the discussion was nearing a turning point, Jonathan watched Whoopi closely. He could see her preparing for one final, forceful attempt to challenge him. He took a moment internally to steady himself, committed to responding with patience and honesty. Whoopi's frustration had been building and she finally released it fully. She had tried logic, emotion, personal critiques, and appeals to tolerance. Yet Jonathan had responded each time with a calm consistency she found increasingly difficult to counter. You know what? She said, her voice rising and filling the room. I'm tired of this religious superiority complex. I'm tired of people like you using faith to justify intolerance and division. Her words came rapidly, expressing long-held frustration. You sit here acting like Jesus while pushing the same ideas that fueled wars, persecution, and hatred throughout history. You're not spreading love, you're spreading spiritual arrogance disguised as humility. The comment was pointed and personal, and the studio felt the tension. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, curious how Jonathan would respond to such a direct accusation. Jonathan felt the weight of her words, not as an attack on his pride, but as a deep misunderstanding of the message he committed himself to share. He thought about how people throughout history had faced criticism or suffering for their faith. Such opposition was not new, but it saddened him because it could push people away from the very hope he believed Jesus offered. As Whoopi spoke, the room began to shift. Many in the audience appeared uneasy with how personal her remarks had become. They sensed she had moved from challenging viewpoints to attacking character. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes, moved by Jonathan's steady responses. A man in the back lowered his head, perhaps praying. The co-hosts looked unsure, caught between supporting Whoopi and recognizing the intensity of the moment. Members of the crew exchanged worried glances. Jonathan remained composed, hands folded, maintaining a calm expression throughout the criticism. When Whoopi finally paused, he spoke in a quiet voice that compelled the entire studio to listen. "Whoopi," he began, "I hear your pain. I hear your frustration with religion that has harmed people, and I feel that sadness too. You're right, terrible things have been done in the name of faith." His acknowledgement visibly surprised her. She had expected defensiveness, not understanding. "But may I ask something?" he said, meeting her eyes with sincere compassion. "What if the issue isn't with Jesus, but with people who didn't follow him? What if the harm you've seen didn't come from Christ, but from those who misrepresented his message?" The question hung in the air, offering a moment of reflection rather than confrontation. For the first time in the entire discussion, Whoopi appeared genuinely speechless. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to respond. Jonathan continued, his voice steady and calm, though more confident now. "I've seen the harm caused by religious hypocrisy too, Whoopi. I've met people who were deeply hurt by churches and by leaders who claim to represent God but spread judgment instead. It grieves me because that isn't who Jesus is." He spoke about Christ's compassion for Jerusalem, his care for those who felt rejected, and his commitment to people who were marginalized. "The Jesus I know didn't come to create another religious system. He came to build a relationship, with you, with me, with anyone willing to receive his love." The studio remained silent as his words settled over the room. Even the camera crew seemed to move more quietly, aware of the seriousness of the moment. Whoopi's eyes were beginning to fill with tears, her earlier arguments weakening under the weight of Jonathan's sincerity. "But, you still think I'm wrong," she whispered. "You believe my faith isn't enough." Jonathan leaned in slightly, his own eyes reflecting emotion. "Whoopi, I don't think you're wrong for searching. I think it's admirable that you care so much about spiritual truth. But I believe your search can find its answer in Jesus. Not in rituals, not in strict rules, but in a person who loves you more deeply than you realize." The atmosphere felt charged, as if everyone sensed something meaningful happening. Several audience members were crying openly. Online, people from different backgrounds, atheists, Christians, and those of other faiths, were reacting to the sincerity of the exchange. It was clear that this moment had surpassed the boundaries of a typical television segment. Real conversations, real reflection, and genuine emotion were unfolding in real time. Jonathan felt that something significant was taking place, something beyond television or debate, something that touched on deeper issues of life, belief, and meaning. Still, Whoopi was not ready to accept his conclusions. Decades of frustration with religious behavior, past negative experiences, and her belief in spiritual diversity were not going to disappear immediately. She quickly wiped her eyes, preparing for one last challenge. "This is exactly what I mean," she said, her voice shaking. "You're being kind and respectful, but you're still telling me that what I believe doesn't matter. This is how people use religion to make others feel guilty for thinking differently." Her tone made it clear she was making a final attempt to resist the direction of the conversation. She seemed ready to deliver her strongest accusation, one that might either undermine Jonathan's credibility or force her to confront truths she had long avoided. The entire studio seemed to pause, waiting for what would come next. Jonathan could see the mixture of pain and fear behind her anger, the frustration created by years of misunderstanding and disappointment. He silently asked for the right words, knowing the importance of what he said next. Whoopi suddenly stood, her chair scraping across the floor. Her face was flushed, and her hands trembled as she pointed at Jonathan. "You want to know what I really think?" she said loudly. "I think you're making money off Jesus while teaching people to reject the very message he preached." Her accusation struck harshly. "You claim to love Jesus, but you're acting just like the Pharisees, using religion to exclude people and make them feel unworthy unless they agree with you." The studio reacted with gasps. She had accused Jonathan, someone known for portraying Christ with sincerity, of misrepresenting the message he loved. The co-hosts looked stunned, unsure of how to respond. Cameras focused on Jonathan, capturing every detail of his face as he absorbed the criticism. He looked genuinely affected, not out of self-defense, but because of the misunderstanding her words revealed. The audience was silent, many visibly uncomfortable. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were filled with compassion rather than anger. His voice was soft but clear. "Whoopi, if you believe I hate Jesus, then you don't know me. But more importantly, you don't know him." He stood slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Everything I am and everything I do is because of my love for Christ. Not the cultural version of Jesus, not a religious stereotype, but the living Jesus who cares for both of us. He continued, his tone steady. You're right that I earn money for portraying Jesus. And do you know how I use it? I support orphanages in Romania. I help fund shelters in Los Angeles. I assist single mothers who can't pay their rent. His voice remained calm but firm. Because that's what Jesus taught. He cared for people in need. Tears ran down his face, but his voice did not waver. If you call that hate, then that's your interpretation. But I call it love. The kind of love that led God to reach out to humanity, even to those who reject him. The room was silent again, the weight of his words clear. Whoopi stood motionless, her accusation hanging between them. You want to know what hate looks like? Jonathan said quietly. Hate is rejecting the greatest gift ever offered, grace, forgiveness, and hope, and responding by questioning someone's motives. He took a small step forward, his expression full of compassion. And you know what love looks like. Love is continuing to offer that gift anyway, because a person's soul matters more than their opinion. The atmosphere in the studio shifted, as though everyone recognized the significance of the moment. Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden cross his grandmother had given him. This belonged to my grandmother, he said with emotion. She taught me that loving Jesus means loving everyone, even those who misunderstand you. She would have loved you, Whoopi. And Jesus loves you, not because of your beliefs but because of who you are. A person made by God, still searching for truth. The cross caught the studio lights, casting a small shadow between them, almost like a bridge across a difficult divide. I'm not your enemy, Whoopi, Jonathan said quietly. I'm simply a flawed man who found healing in the only place I believe it truly exists. And I want that healing for you as well. Whoopi didn't move. Her earlier frustration had faded, replaced by an emotion she couldn't fully identify, something between regret, uncertainty, and unexpected longing. The studio remained completely silent, as if no one wanted to interrupt the moment. Slowly, tears slipped down her face. She lowered herself back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. I don't understand, she whispered through her fingers. I've been angry for so long. At religion, at people who insist they have all the answers. She looked up, her eyes red. I've even been angry at Jesus because so many people have used his name to hurt others. Her honesty was raw, far different from her earlier statements. Jonathan immediately knelt beside her, moved by the weight of her admission. Whoopi, you're justified in feeling that way, he said softly, his tone full of understanding. Jesus was outraged by religious hypocrisy too. He turned over tables in the temple because people were exploiting the poor. He called religious leaders whitewashed tombs because they looked righteous on the outside while lacking sincerity. His voice remained calm, his words steady and reassuring. The Jesus I know grieves when his name is used to justify exclusion or harm. That's not who he is. And I'm sorry that this has been your experience of Christianity. The audience watched, hardly believing what they were seeing, a sincere moment of human connection unfolding on live television. As the cameras continued recording, Whoopi looked at Jonathan with a clarity that hadn't been there before. I've spent years building walls, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper but clearly picked up by the microphones. I thought I was protecting myself from judgment, from people telling me I wasn't good enough for God. But maybe, she hesitated, maybe I was protecting myself from hope. Jonathan gently took her hand, a simple gesture that seemed to unlock something deeply buried. Whoopi, he said, God's love isn't something you earn by being good enough. It's a gift. That's what grace is, unearned kindness from a God who loves you as you are, but loves you too much to leave you unchanged. In the weeks after that remarkable television exchange, something meaningful began to develop. Whoopi didn't suddenly become a Christian. Genuine spiritual growth rarely happens instantly. But she started exploring faith with new openness. She attended a small church in Harlem, sitting quietly in the back, listening to messages about grace and forgiveness. She began reading the Gospels, often moved to tears as she saw Jesus from a new perspective, not as the rigid figure she'd resisted, but as someone who had been patiently reaching out to her for years. Her public comments about faith became more thoughtful, and she privately contacted Jonathan several times for prayer and guidance. The emotional barriers she'd built were slowly coming down, replaced by a sense of hope she never expected. Jonathan, for his part, received both criticism and appreciation. Some Christians believed he should have been tougher in his responses, while others admired his calm and Christ-like approach. But Jonathan knew he had simply done what he felt called to do, speak truth with compassion even when it came at a cost. He continued his work on The Chosen with a renewed sense of purpose, aware that each episode might reach someone like Whoopi, someone hurt by religion but longing to know the true Jesus. The studio moment became a turning point in how he viewed his platform. He realized more deeply that his responsibility was not only to portray Christ on screen, but to reflect Christ's heart in every real-life interaction. He often reflected on that day as a gift, not because of the attention it brought, but because it allowed God to offer hope to someone who desperately needed it. The message from that day is clear. The strongest defense of faith is not an impressive argument, but love expressed through actions. Authentic Christianity doesn't aim to win debates. It aims to win hearts through genuine compassion. When we encounter opposition, we have a choice, to react with defensiveness or to respond with the kind of love Jonathan demonstrated, compassion for the pain behind the criticism while still standing firm in truth. The gospel is not only something we believe, it's something we live out, especially when it requires courage. And here's the real question. When your faith is challenged, do you react with the harshness often associated with religion, or with the redemptive spirit of Jesus? The world is watching, waiting to see if our love is genuine. If this story encouraged you, hit the subscribe button for more faith-focused content designed to challenge and inspire. And share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time when someone's gentle response changed your perspective, or how you hope to show more love to others.